The moment I realized something was wrong was when the room started laughing and my mother didn't. Ethan stood in the center of the reception, glass raised, smiling like this was the best day of his life. He talked about success, hard work, and finally making it out. Then his eyes landed on his mom. He joked about how she still wore the same kind of clothes she'd worn his whole childhood. He joked about how she had parked her old car far away so no one would see it. He said she taught him what kind of life he never wanted. People laughed, not because it was that funny, but because the groom was laughing first. Linda sat quietly at her table near the back. Her hands were folded in her lap. She didn't look angry. She didn't look surprised either. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from holding your breath for years. When people glanced at her, she smiled politely, like she didn't want to ruin the moment. Ethan kept going. He said growing up poor made him ambitious. He thanked his wife's parents for showing him how things are supposed to be. Someone clinked a glass. Someone else cheered. The band played softly in the background, trying to cover the awkwardness that had settled over the room. Linda stood up slowly. For a second, Ethan thought she was about to cry. Instead, she straightened her jacket, picked up her purse, and nodded once to the table. She didn't look at her son. She walked past the dance floor, past the guests, and out the doors without a word. People whispered. Ethan shrugged it off with a joke and told the DJ to turn the music back up. He thought that was the end of it. He thought his mother would go home quietly like she always did. But as the music started again, a low, heavy sound rolled in from outside. The laughter faded. Heads turned toward the doors. Whatever was coming hadn't arrived by accident, and something told me the story wasn't ending the way Ethan thought it would. Long before the wedding, before the nice suit and the confident smile, it was just Linda and her son. Ethan's father left when Ethan was still small, walking out with a suitcase and a promise to call that never came. Linda didn't have time to be angry. She had a child to raise and bills that didn't care about broken hearts. She worked mornings at a grocery store and nights cleaning offices downtown. Some days she slept in her car between shifts. She learned how to stretch one meal into two and how to smile even when her feet ached so badly she could barely stand. When Ethan was hungry, she told him she'd already eaten. When he needed school supplies, she went without heat for a week. Linda never talked about dreams. Survival was the only plan. Still, she made sure Ethan believed his life could be bigger than hers. She pushed him to study, praised every small win, and sat through school events in a worn coat, clapping louder than anyone else. When college came, Linda sold the last thing that meant something personal to her. The ring Ethan's father had given her sat in a pawn shop window the same day she mailed in the tuition payment. Ethan never knew where the money came from. She didn't want him to feel guilty. She wanted him to feel free. As Ethan grew older, his world changed. New friends, better neighborhoods, conversations Linda couldn't follow. He started correcting the way she spoke. He stopped inviting her to events. When she hugged him in public, he stiffened. He said she wouldn't understand his work, his life, his future. Linda noticed everything but said nothing. She watched her son become someone who no longer needed her, and worse, someone who didn't want to be reminded of where he came from. Still, she kept cheering quietly from the sidelines, holding pride and pain in the same place, never asking for thanks, only hoping he'd remember who stood behind him when no one else did. Ethan met Claire during a work conference, and from the start, she represented a life he had always wanted. Her family hosted dinners with matching plates, soft music, and conversations that never turned uncomfortable. They talked about vacations, investments, and plans made years in advance. Ethan felt like he finally belonged somewhere. At first, Linda was still invited around. Holidays were shared, though she noticed the difference right away. Claire's family was polite but distant, and Ethan stayed close by, answering questions for his mother before she could finish a sentence. When Linda laughed too loudly or told an old story, Ethan's smile tightened. Over time, the invitations slowed. Thanksgiving plans were already complicated. Christmas dinners became small gatherings. Ethan stopped calling on weekends. When Linda asked if she had done something wrong, he told her not to take everything so personally. When she did see him, he changed. He corrected her words in front of others. He suggested she dress a little nicer if she was coming out. Once, before a dinner, he quietly asked her not to talk too much because he didn't want things to get awkward. Linda nodded, even though her chest felt heavy. Claire never said anything cruel, but she never defended Linda either. She watched, silent, as Ethan slowly erased his mother from the picture. Linda felt like a guest in her own son's life, someone who needed permission to exist in his new world. Ethan told himself he was just trying to fit in. He said his mother wouldn't understand the pressure he was under. He believed keeping her at a distance was easier than explaining her to people who had never struggled. Linda went along with it because pushing back meant losing him completely. She chose silence over conflict, love over pride. But with every correction, every missed holiday, every time Ethan acted like she was something to be managed instead of someone to be loved, a quiet line was crossed. The distance between them wasn't accidental anymore. It was a choice, and Linda felt it settling in, one moment at a time. The wedding invitation arrived later than Linda expected, plain and short, like it had been added as an afterthought. When Ethan finally called, his voice sounded careful, like he was choosing each word before saying it. He said he wanted her there, but he also said the day was important and needed to go smoothly. He explained the seating would be arranged, and it might be better if she stayed toward the back. He asked her not to bring up old memories or family stories because Claire's relatives wouldn't relate to them. He mentioned speeches and said it was best if she didn't speak unless asked. None of it sounded cruel when he said it, but together it felt heavy. Then he paused and offered to lend her a dress. He said it would match the style of the wedding better than what she usually wore. Linda thanked him and said she'd figure it out. After the call ended, she sat quietly for a long time, staring at the phone like it had taken something from her. She didn't argue. She didn't ask why her presence needed rules. She simply accepted everything. From the outside, it would have looked like she had given up, like years of being pushed aside had finally worn her down. In truth, something else had settled in her. Linda understood clearly where she stood in her son's life. She saw that love, at least from his side, now came with conditions. And once she saw it, she stopped trying to earn a place that should have been hers all along. On the day of the wedding, she arrived early and took the seat she was given without complaint. She kept her hands folded and her voice low. She watched Ethan smile for photos, watched him laugh with people who barely knew him. No one noticed how calm she was, how steady her breathing felt. Linda wasn't there to be seen or heard. She was there because she had chosen to be. And while everyone else believed she had accepted her role quietly, she had already made peace with something deeper. Whatever happened next, she was done shrinking herself to make her son comfortable. When the dinner plates were cleared and the lights softened, Ethan stood and reached for the microphone. The room quieted, ready for something heartfelt. He smiled wide and began talking about how far he had come, how proud he was of the life he had built. Then he turned toward Claire's parents and thanked them for welcoming him, for showing him what real success looked like. People nodded and clapped. Ethan laughed and said being around their family taught him what ambition and class really meant. His words sounded polished, practiced, like he had been waiting for this moment. Then his tone shifted. He glanced across the room, toward the back, and smiled again. He joked about growing up with a budget lifestyle. He said it pushed him to work harder so he wouldn't be stuck in the same place forever. Someone laughed loudly. Ethan added that escaping that life was the best decision he ever made. The laughter spread. Some people looked uncomfortable, but most followed along. Ethan didn't stop. He joked about old habits, old clothes, old ways of thinking. He didn't use names, but everyone knew who he meant. All eyes slowly turned toward Linda. She sat still, her posture straight, her face calm. The noise of the room washed over her, but she didn't react. No anger, no tears. Just a quiet stillness that felt out of place in a room full of laughter. A few guests glanced at her and then quickly looked away. Ethan finished his speech to applause. He raised his glass and took a drink, proud and satisfied. He never once looked back at his mother. For Linda, something shifted. It wasn't shock. It wasn't pain in the way people expect. It was clarity. In front of everyone, her son had turned her life into a joke, her sacrifices into something to be ashamed of. This wasn't careless humor. It was a choice made out loud. The room moved on, music starting again, conversations picking up. But for Linda, the moment had already passed. Whatever she had been holding on to quietly for years finally let go. And once it did, there was no turning back. After the applause faded, Linda placed her napkin neatly on the table. Her movements were slow and steady, like she had all the time in the world. She pushed her chair back and stood up. A few people noticed and paused their conversations. No one stopped her. She didn't look upset. There were no tears in her eyes, no shaking hands. She picked up her purse and walked toward the exit with quiet confidence. As she passed nearby tables, whispers followed her. Some guests looked confused. Others looked relieved that the moment was over. Ethan noticed her leaving and smirked. He leaned toward someone beside him and said something that made them laugh. To him, this was proof that she couldn't handle the truth. He believed she was doing what she always did when things became uncomfortable, leaving quietly so he didn't have to deal with her feelings. The music grew louder as Linda reached the doors. She paused for just a second, not to look back, but to take a breath. Then she stepped outside, the noise cutting off behind her. The cool air felt sharp, but clear. Inside, the reception carried on. Drinks were poured. People returned to dancing. Ethan felt light, almost victorious. The hardest part of the night, at least in his mind, was over. Outside, Linda walked across the parking lot without rushing. Her heels clicked against the pavement, steady and sure. She wasn't replaying the speech in her head. She wasn't wondering what she could have said differently. That moment had already passed. What unsettled the few guests watching from the windows was how calm she looked. There was no anger in her posture, no sadness in her face. Just focus. Whatever she was doing, it wasn't an escape. Ethan didn't notice any of this. He lifted his glass again, laughing with friends, convinced he had proven something. He had no idea that the quiet exit he dismissed was the beginning of something he couldn't undo. The music was loud again, and people were laughing when a deep engine sound cut through the walls. At first, it blended with the noise of the party, but then it grew heavier, closer, impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped one by one. Someone near the doors turned their head. Then another. The sound came again, low and powerful, followed by bright headlights sweeping across the entrance. The doors opened, and a hush fell over the room. A large black Hummer rolled into view and stopped just outside. It didn't rush. It didn't honk. It simply arrived, like it belonged there. Guests stood from their chairs, confused. Ethan frowned and stepped closer, trying to see what was happening. He laughed once, unsure, and said something about the valet making a mistake. Then the driver's door opened. Linda stepped out. She closed the door slowly and adjusted her jacket. Her posture was straight, her face calm. She didn't look around for approval or reaction. She walked toward the entrance with the same steady pace she had when she left, only now every eye in the room followed her. The whispers turned into silence. People who had laughed earlier stared openly. Some looked at Ethan, waiting for his reaction. His smile faded. Confusion crossed his face, followed by something closer to disbelief. This wasn't the kind of car someone borrowed for attention. This wasn't an accident. Linda stopped just inside the doors, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The contrast between how she had been treated minutes ago and how she stood now was impossible to miss. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time that night, he didn't know what to say. The room felt smaller, tighter, like it was holding its breath. Linda didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush to explain. She simply stood there, composed and certain. Whatever she had come back to say, it wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to be heard. Linda took a few steps forward, stopping where everyone could see her. She didn't wait for permission to speak. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear enough that the room stayed silent. She said that years ago, after Ethan's father left, there had been a small insurance payout. It wasn't much, and it was meant to help her survive. Instead of spending it, she chose to invest it slowly and carefully. She learned as she went, asked questions, and made quiet decisions no one noticed. Over time, that money grew. She bought small properties and saved every dollar she could. She lived the same way she always had, not because she had to, but because she didn't want her son to feel different from other kids. She didn't want him carrying the weight of knowing how close they had once been to losing everything. Then she explained the part Ethan had never known. When college came, the tuition wasn't paid by luck or loans. It came from a trust she created in his name. It was set up so he would never see her struggle, never feel like his future depended on sacrifice. She wanted him to walk into his life believing he had earned his place. The room stayed quiet as the words settled. People shifted in their seats. Some glanced at Ethan, waiting for him to react. Linda looked at her son and said she never told him because pride wasn't the point. She didn't want praise. She wanted him to feel confident, not careful. Everything he stood on was built that way, quietly, without applause. Ethan's face drained of color. The story he had told himself for years no longer made sense. The life he claimed to have escaped had been protecting him the whole time. Linda finished by saying she never regretted a single choice she made. But respect mattered. And tonight, she had finally decided to speak, not to shame him, but to tell the truth he had forgotten. Linda took a deep breath and let the silence in the room stretch just a little longer. Then she spoke again, her voice steady but firm. She told everyone that the trust which had quietly paid for Ethan's education, helped him start his career, and supported much of the life he boasted about, would end tonight. No more funds, no more safety net. The words landed like a weight in the room. Guests who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably. Claire's parents exchanged looks, surprise and disbelief on their faces. Ethan's confident smile faltered. The air felt heavier, charged with a sudden tension he hadn't expected. Linda looked directly at her son. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply said that she never wanted gratitude, never asked for thanks, and had only ever wanted him to grow into a kind, respectful man. But she would not allow disrespect to continue, not from someone who had benefited so much from her sacrifices. She made it clear, the support stops here. Ethan's face turned pale. He opened his mouth but no words came out. Claire's family studied him closely now, their smiles gone, replaced by judgment and concern. The guests who had been entertained by the earlier jokes now felt the weight of the truth. The laughter that had filled the room minutes ago vanished completely. Linda stepped back slightly, her posture calm, but her presence filled the space. The power had shifted. The woman who had been quiet, overlooked, and even humiliated now stood in control. The message was clear, respect and gratitude were not optional, and the life Ethan thought he owned was never his alone. Ethan tried to meet her eyes, to say something clever, but nothing came. The celebration felt suspended, caught between the shock of revelation and the realization of what had been lost. No one spoke for a moment, and in that silence, Linda's quiet strength became the center of attention. The reversal was complete. The room no longer followed Ethan's lead. The admiration he had expected vanished. And in its place, Linda's calm authority reminded everyone that true power often comes quietly, but it is impossible to ignore. Linda didn't wait for anyone to react. She turned calmly and walked back to the Hummer, her steps steady and unhurried. She opened the door, settled in, and started the engine. The deep rumble filled the parking lot, but she didn't rush. She wasn't angry, she wasn't bitter, she was simply done. Inside the wedding hall, the atmosphere had changed completely. Guests whispered quietly, unsure how to act, while Ethan stood frozen, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The confidence he had carried all night had vanished. For the first time, he felt the weight of shame. Not the kind that comes from getting caught, but the kind that comes from realizing he had mistreated someone who had given him everything. Claire and her family looked at him differently now, their polite smiles replaced with careful, measured expressions. Ethan's accomplishments suddenly felt smaller, hollow, built on the labor and sacrifices of someone he had laughed at. He understood, in a way he hadn't before, that money, status, or appearances don't make a person honorable. Respect and character do. Linda drove slowly out of the parking lot, the cool night air brushing past the windows. She didn't need anyone to see her strength, didn't need applause or recognition. She wasn't leaving for revenge or to make a point. She was leaving because she deserved peace, dignity, and freedom from the son who had forgotten her value. As she merged onto the road, she thought about the years of sacrifice, the nights of worry, the quiet support that had allowed Ethan to build the life he now called his own. She had no regrets. What mattered most was that she had stood up, told the truth, and reclaimed her place, not as a guest in her son's life, but as a person worthy of respect. Ethan remained in the hall, speechless. The lesson had arrived too late for him to change the moment, but not too late to change himself. Linda's calm exit left one clear message for everyone watching: kindness, respect, and gratitude toward those who shaped you are not optional. They are the measure of a person, and ignoring them comes at a cost that no success can erase.